Just a few years ago, the Purdue football program was in a decent spot. After one of the worst hires in college football history in Darrell Hazell, Jeff Brohm came in from Western Kentucky and immediately turned things around. He made a bowl game in his first year, got a ton of big-time players like Rondale Moore and David Bell to come to the program, beat multiple top 5 teams like Ohio State, Iowa, and Michigan State, and even got them to the Big Ten championship game. The Boilermakers were becoming one of the better teams in the Big Ten, sending a lot of players off to the NFL, and it looked like blue skies were on the horizon for quite some time in West Lafayette. Except then Jeff Brohm went home. He went back to the school he played at in college in Louisville and has decided to turn around the Cardinals program. He left Purdue high and dry, and while I don't necessarily blame him, Purdue has been in a spiral ever since then. They hired Ryan Walters to become their new head man, but so far through a season and a half, Purdue football has been going backwards. Ryan Walters may not be the man for the job, and the downfall of Purdue football has come. I was originally going to make this video late last week, but I wanted to wait until after they lost to Wisconsin to make this video. Today we're going to talk about the rise of Purdue football and how Jeff Brohm rebuilt them, and then the downfall under Ryan Walters, and what I think should happen next for them to save things. But before we get started, if you're a big fan of college football, be sure to subscribe to the channel, leave a like if you want to support today's video, and let me know what player, team, topic, or situation I can cover next. Now let's get started and talk about the sad downfall of Purdue football. Okay, so before we start the video, I'm going to clarify something. I grew up a Mizzou fan, which is the team I absolutely love, but I went to school at both Purdue and Indiana University, and ultimately, I love both of those teams as well. Mizzou is my diehard team, but yeah, I spent time at both Purdue and Indiana, which is why I also like those teams, and I was there during the Jeff Brohm era and the peak of Purdue football of the last decade. But before Jeff Brohm got there, they were coming off one of the worst eras in school history. The reason why Purdue ended up going after Darrell Hazell is because he had a good couple of years at Kent State, which is one of the worst programs in college football history. Hazell ended up doing tremendous while he was there, but when he was hired at Purdue, he did nothing. He went 1-11 in year 1, 3-9 in year 2, 2-10 in year 3, and 3-9 in year 4. He never finished higher than 6th in the Big Ten West, and they won a total of 3 conference games in 4 years. The stands were empty each and every Saturday, they were sending nobody off to the NFL, and Purdue football was dead last in the Big Ten. They were as dead of a program as humanly possible, but this gave off the perception that Purdue was a bad program historically. Well, that's not exactly true. While they're not Ohio State or Michigan, Purdue has definitely been in the upper half of Big Ten programs historically, as they've had some really special seasons, a lot of really good quarterbacks like Drew Brees, and have a lot of pageantry. Purdue desperately needed to make a hire that would fix things, and Jeff Brohm was the guy to do it. After leading Western Kentucky to back-to-back Conference USA championship games, Coach Jeff Brohm decided to move on to Purdue. He ended up going 30-10 and 2-0 in bowl games while he was there, and AD Mike Babinski said, quote, "We were fortunate to meet with many talented coaches from around the country during our search, and Jeff's name was the one that rose to the top early in the process. He is a coach who has already achieved tremendous success and at the same time has incredible upside. His reputation and record of accomplishment as an innovative offensive coach and developer of quarterbacks is second to none." This was a huge deal for Purdue, as going back in time, he played for the prestigious Louisville Trinity High School and was a star quarterback with the Cardinals before he famously said, "Let's play football" during the XFL. In 2017, people were excited for Jeff Brohm, but nobody really thought he would do a whole lot. In their first game, they'd play against number 16 Louisville in Lucas Oil Stadium, and they'd end up losing that game by 7. Everyone knew immediately that Purdue was going to be a little bit more competitive, and they would end up actually having a good season. Going into the final 2 weekends of the college football season, Braum and the Boilermakers were 4-6, and they went and beat both Iowa and Indiana to get to a bowl game in year 1. They then would beat Arizona in the Foster Farms Bowl, and they went 7-6 in year 1. David Blau and Elijah Sindelar split the quarterback duty. They had 4 guys at running back, and their best guy on defense was Jawan Bentley. In 2018, the Boilermakers once again returned Sindelar, but after he ended up struggling, David Blau would once again take over as the quarterback, and they had a special year. Braum started to recruit better and brought in a guy by the name of Rondale Moore, and Moore went crazy in their first game against Northwestern. While they would end up losing to the Wildcats, Purdue was definitely a different team. Somehow, someway, they lost by 1 point to Eastern Michigan the following week, and then lost by a field goal to Mizzou. Purdue was 0-3, but their special season would now start. It started with a win over number 23 Boston College, a road victory over Nebraska, they destroyed Illinois, and then they beat number 2 Ohio State 49-20. It was the feature ABC game of the night, and I was personally at this matchup, and it was electric. It was one of the biggest upset wins of the decade, and after that they'd lay an egg against Michigan State and Rocky Lombardi. From there though, they'd come back home and beat number 16 Iowa before getting beat in the snow by Minnesota and losing in 3 overtimes to Wisconsin. Once again, they would need one more win to make a bowl, and they would beat Indiana 28-21 to go 6-6 before then getting killed 63-14 in the Music City Bowl. That was embarrassing, but the team was better. David Blau threw for 3,700 yards and 25 touchdowns, DJ Knox ran for 800 yards and 8 scores, and Rondale Moore caught 114 passes for 1,258 yards and 12 touchdowns, while also running for 213 yards and 2 scores on the ground and returning kicks and punts. Moore was a bona fide star, but 2019 would be tough. New quarterbacks Jack Plummer and Aiden O'Connell really couldn't figure things out. The running back position was terrible, and the lone bright spot was David Bell, their freshman receiver. Purdue would end up going 4-8 in 2019, which was extremely disappointing, with their only decent win coming against Vanderbilt in Week 2. Things didn't get a whole lot better in 2020, as while winning their first 2 games against Iowa and Illinois, they lose their final 4 to finish with a 2-4 record. All of a sudden, since the Music City Bowl, Jeff Brohm had sort of worn off, and many were waiting for him to break out again. Luckily, that would end up happening back in 2021. In weeks 1 and 2, they'd beat Oregon State and UConn before traveling on the road to Notre Dame. Purdue had a ton of turnovers, but the game was actually decently competitive, but they did end up losing. From there, they beat Illinois, and they were off to a 3-1 start. Sadly though, every time they made progress, they would fall apart, as they lost at home to Minnesota in a game that really wasn't all that close, and then they pulled off one of the shockers of the year. Going on the road to play against the number 2 Iowa Hawkeyes, no one predicted that Purdue would win this game. Not only did they win, but they won 24-7, and Purdue beat another team ranked inside the top 2. That's where that meme started. At this exact same time, Aiden O'Connell and David Bell were becoming 2 of the better skill players in the country, and after that they get kicked in against Wisconsin 30-13 before having a strong finish to the season. They'd go on the road and beat Nebraska 28-23 before another top 4 team came to town, as Michigan State ended up coming to West Lafayette. This game was extremely thrilling, and it was in early November, and in a perfect Big Ten football day, they beat Michigan State 40-29 and knocked off the undefeated Spartans. Sadly though, they could not continue beating top 4 teams, as they would get killed by Ohio State 59-31, but they would finish the year with wins over Northwestern and Indiana to go 8-4. They then would end up playing in the Music City Bowl, where in a shootout they won 48-45, and there was also a controversial ending, as Tennessee should have gotten a touchdown but they didn't call it on the field, and Purdue went 9-4 in 2021, and Braum saved his job. In 2022, they'd end up returning Aiden O'Connell, and we saw Iowa transfer receiver Charlie Jones go insane, but Purdue underachieved. They lost to Syracuse and Penn State in the first month of the season, and between that, they beat FAU and Indiana State. They then got a win over number 21 Minnesota, beat Maryland and Nebraska, and were back up to 5-2. Sadly though, they could not take care of Wisconsin for what felt like the 18th year in a row, and they'd also get killed at home to Iowa, and they're all of a sudden 5-4. But because the Big Ten West is ridiculous, after beating number 21 Illinois on the road and beating Northwestern and Indiana to finish the year, an 8-4 record got them into the Big Ten championship. From there, they'd face off against number 2 Michigan, and in that game they were competitive in the first half, but ultimately lost 43-22. The main takeaway here was that Braum got them to the Big Ten championship, and then they'd end up playing LSU in a bowl game, and they get killed 63-7, and that game was terrible. But between that, Jeff Brohm took the Louisville job. That sent shockwaves around Purdue, as many thought it was just a matter of time that he would end up going back home, but it still hurt the Purdue fan base, and all of a sudden they were left scrambling. So, who would Purdue hire next? Well, they grabbed Illinois defensive coordinator Ryan Walters, who oversaw the number 1 defense in the country at Illinois at one point. At only 36 years old, Walters had blown up at both Mizzou and Purdue and was a finalist for the Broyles Award, and many thought he'd have the charisma and recruiting ability to now be the next head coach at Purdue and help bring them back to good heights. Mike Bavinski said, quote, "From an early point in the search process, Coach Walters stood out because of the energy, passion, and intelligence he displayed as a defensive coordinator in both the Big Ten and Southeastern Conference. His meteoric rise in the coaching profession is in large part due to his unique ability to connect with student athletes as both a coach and mentor. With that in mind, we look forward to the culture and atmosphere of success he and his staff will instill in and around our program, and we see him as the perfect fit for our university and this community." At one point, Walters was also seen as a top candidate for the head coaching vacancy at Colorado, but obviously they got Deion Sanders instead, and that was a much better choice. I guess you could say there weren't exactly expectations for Walters in year one, but Purdue fans were now accustomed to winning. He ended up bringing in Hudson Card from Texas to be his quarterback, and there's also a plethora of other big-time transfers. Devin Mockabee and Tyrone Tracy became the main running backs, true freshman Dylan Thieneman blew up on the defensive side of the ball, and Deion Burks also became the top wideout. Purdue, though, was terrible. They ended up losing at home to Fresno State 35-31 in week 1, before getting a weird road victory in week 2 against Virginia Tech. They were going 1-1, and many thought that Purdue was headed back in the right direction, but quickly it was apparent they weren't. They dropped back-to-back home games to Syracuse and Wisconsin at home, and neither game were competitive, and then they'd end up beating Illinois 44-19, getting them back in the win column. At this point, the Boilermakers were 2-3, and then they'd start losing. They got beat by Iowa 20-14 on the road, got killed by number 3 Ohio State 41-7 at home, got beat on the road by Nebraska 31-14, and then got beat by number 3 Michigan 41-13. All of a sudden, Purdue was 2-7 with a 1-5 mark in the conference, and they would really need to stop the bleeding. It ended up happening against Minnesota, as they would win that game 49-30 at home, and then they would go on the road and lose to Northwestern 23-15 in a game I was at, and they are now 3-8. Things were getting pretty bad for Purdue, but in a battle of two terrible teams, they would beat Indiana 35-31 in the Oaken Bucket game, and they would finish the season at 4-8 with a 3-6 mark in the conference. As I said, Hudson Card was the guy at quarterback, Devin Mockabee and Tyrone Tracy were the top 2 running backs, and Deion Burks ended up becoming their best receiver. One thing that Walters seemingly had going for him was his recruiting ability. Purdue brought in the number 29 overall class in 2024, which was headlined by Coy Beasley, Terrion Grant, and Marcos Davila, alongside Luke Williams. All these guys were considered blue-chip recruits, and in the transfer portal, he also did some work. He brought in a ton of former Georgia guys like CJ Madden, Nyland Green, and Dylan Morissette, plus just a ton of solid role players. Going into 2024, many expected Hudson Card to take the next step, and all of a sudden we are supposed to see Purdue break out. That has not happened in the slightest in 2024. In week 1, they would have a deceptive win over Indiana State 49-0, where they were firing on all cylinders, and Hudson Card had a near-perfect game. I guess they got all their good luck out in week 1 against an FCS school, because these last 4 weeks have been terrible. Against number 18 Notre Dame, Purdue was hyped up to maybe pull off an upset here. Instead of pulling off an upset, they had arguably the worst loss in school history, getting killed at home 66-7. It would not get any better, as the following week they get beat by Oregon State 38-21 on the road, and then they came back home and played Nebraska and lost that game 28-10. Boilers were now 1-3, and it felt like the sky was falling. They now had to play Wisconsin, a team they never beat, and they lost this game 52-6. So far, Purdue has absolutely been outclassed, beaten, and torn down in every single game they've played, except the FCS opponent down the street. Many believe that Walters may not make it through the year unless he can pull off a couple of crazy victories, and right now that's looking very unlikely. Out of their last 7 games, they currently have to play 5 ranked teams: number 23 Illinois, number 3 Oregon, number 2 Ohio State, number 4 Penn State, and number 18 Indiana. They also have to play on the road against Michigan State and at home against Northwestern, and at most, I see 1 win coming against those Wildcats. Things are really, really bad at Purdue right now, so what the heck has gone wrong? Well, he made a disastrous hire at the offensive coordinator spot, as Graham Harrell has run the Purdue program in the ground, and his offense just hasn't been working the last few years, and he thought it could work at Purdue, and it hasn't. Hudson Card looks terrible, the receivers have not stepped up, and the running game has been no good. The offensive line looks completely disoriented, and the defense has all of a sudden fallen apart. That was supposed to be Ryan Walters' main thing, but they have crumbled this year. Their offense looks directionless, the defense can't stop anybody, and they've been outscored 184-44 in those matchups, and they've suffered 2 of the worst losses in school history during this time. Hudson Card is currently listed as out for this Illinois game, so it could get ugly really quickly in Champaign, or who knows, maybe the backup quarterback and the makeshift staff come out of nowhere, and all of a sudden Purdue knocks off a couple of ranked teams and fixes the year. Honestly, that is not likely, and Walter said, quote, "The most disappointing thing is, if I'm being completely honest, we're a bad football team right now. We're not disciplined when it gets tight, we play with poor technique when it's our turn to make a play, and we also get sloppy when we have to do things to make up ground. Right now, it feels like Walters is running out of answers, and it seems like Purdue made the wrong hire. The Purdue job is one of the more difficult jobs in the Big Ten, and at 36 years old and just being a defensive coordinator for a team that had a breakout season may not have been the credentials for a coach that could see a lot of success in the Big Ten. Honestly, because of how stiff the buyout is, I think Walters will survive the year and will get a year 3, but I would not be surprised if he gets fired early on in 2025 if things don't go better quickly. It is really sad to see, as Purdue football has been a big part of my life these last couple of years, and right now I don't even watch them on TV because there's no point. It's gotten that bad in West Lafayette. And what do you guys think? If you're a Purdue fan, what the heck is wrong with the Purdue program, and what do they need to do in the future? Be sure to let me know down below your thoughts. Let me know what program or coach I should take a look at next. And before you go, don't forget to also leave a like, subscribe if you're new, and check out all my other videos on the end screen. I hope to see you guys again soon, but until next time, peace.